Thank you. So over to you, Adam.
Sure. Well, thank you, Rob, first of all, and ITIF for hosting us. I want to start out by saying that I'm a proud Democrat. I think Joe Biden's doing a great job. I want to see him reelected, assuming he runs again. And I think that his 2020 victory was powered by an urban-suburban coalition of voters that I believe is very happy with tech services. And so my biggest concern as someone who supports President Biden is that the Biden tech agenda may not fully reflect the priorities of the Biden voter. So I thought I'd inject a little public opinion data into this conversation and ask Lauren to pull up a few slides. First, President Biden's op-ed said a lot about voters' concerns about tech, but almost nothing about the voters valuing tech, and this is a point that's been made by other panelists. And I think the Beltway bubble has kind of assumed for years that there is a broad voter backlash against tech. But the data shows that there really is no techlash among Democratic voters. For the past 3 years, Pew Research Center has asked voters whether they felt that technology companies have a, quote, positive effect in the way things are going in the country these days, unquote. And what's notable about these results is that while the Republican voter sentiment towards tech has dropped 18 points in 3 years, and I think that's largely due to Trump and Fox and that effect, Democratic voter sentiment towards tech has remained both consistent and consistently positive. It's at 58%. And if you go to the next slide, Pew actually breaks this down, voters between conservative, moderate Republicans, moderate Democrats, and liberals. You'll see that while conservatives have the most negative sentiment towards the tech industry, self-described moderate Democratic voters, these are the swing voters who put Joe Biden over the top in those key suburbs in 2020. They comprise about half of the Democratic electorate. They have the most positive feelings towards tech of all voters. That's the light blue line, 64% positive towards tech. So I hope that the Biden administration will see that there really is no such thing as a Democratic techlash. Democrats remain consistently positive towards tech. Second, if you go to the next slide, with that as background, we wanted to know how people who voted in last year's midterm elections wanted the Biden administration to approach tech policy and regulation. So our organization commissioned Morning Consult to do a survey in mid-November, just after the elections of just midterm voters. If you go to the next slide, the first question we asked was, when it comes to the Biden administration's approach to tech issues, which view came closest to their opinion? So first, would you like to see the Biden administration take aggressive action against the tech industry? Only 10% agreed with that. Now, on the other extreme, only 14% of voters said the Biden administration should leave tech completely alone, sort of libertarian position. But it's in the middle where things really got interesting. So 40% of voters said that they wanted to see more tech consumer protection regulations, but they want to make sure that that regulation doesn't make apps and services less useful. And 23% of voters said the top tech priority should be more tech jobs, not more tech regulation. And of course, we've seen the tech industry has shed 200,000 jobs since the beginning of last year. What you're seeing here, this is significant. Nearly a quarter of midterm voters are saying to the administration their top priority should be creating more tech jobs in more places. If you go to the next slide, we wanted to drill down into specific issues, because it's not enough to say that voters want action on tech regulation. You really have to ask which specific issues are at the top of their wish list. So when we asked voters which tech issues, these are midterm voters, which issues they'd like to see the Biden administration focus on, their top ranked priorities were fighting scams and malware, enacting consumer privacy regulation, which Steve and Jules and Rob have all talked about, combating data discrimination, it's really important, and bringing more broadband. At the bottom of their priority list were three issues that were mentioned in the president's op-ed: eliminating Section 230 liability protection, banning targeted advertising, and banning vertically integrated services like Amazon Prime and Google Maps. So there may be a slight disconnect with voters here in terms of where to focus. If you go to my last slide, President Biden's op-ed appealed to Congress. And so we asked voters, midterm voters, which tech issues they wanted to see Congress most focus on. And this slide shows those results broken down by voter party ID, because I think that's significant here. And I just want to highlight three big takeaways from this. First, there is bipartisan voter agreement around online security and privacy being high priorities. Those rank the highest, right? Second, there is bipartisan agreement that antitrust legislation, which was here, we asked about App Store legislation and vertical integration bans, those are a low priority for voters. The voters do say that they oppose business consolidation that raises prices for consumers, which I think we see in other sectors. And finally, and Steve talked about this, there's significant party line disagreement over online speech and content moderation. Democrats say here they want more action against misinformation. The inverse of that, Republicans say they want more protection of free speech online. And that is why I think it's superficial to call Section 230 content moderation issue ripe for bipartisan agreement, because what Steve said, the parties want is two fundamentally different things. It's like saying there's a bipartisan consensus for taking a trip. Sure, but if one party wants to go to New York and the other wants to go to New Mexico, that's not really a consensus. And what you saw time and time again last year was that the Republicans want to neuter platforms' ability to engage in content moderation. They turned almost every tech bill last year into an anti-content moderation bill. And so neutering content moderation really isn't a right bipartisan issue. It's an area where Democrats, I think, should resist Republicans tooth and nail. So to close, Joe Biden's success as a politician, I think, has really been premised on his instinct for the average voter. This data shows that the Biden voters are not radicals when it comes to tech. They're pragmatists. They want to see a Biden tech policy agenda that's less ivory tower and more Scranton. So, let's give voters more security and privacy protections. Let's bring broadband and tech jobs to more parts of the country. Let's preserve platforms' ability to keep their communities healthy and moderate content. And let's not mess with the value that tech apps and services are giving millions of people every day. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. It was really interesting polling.